Good afternoon. This is Barbara Colm again, and I have the privilege and pleasure to have Grover Norquist sitting next to me.
Yeah.
Grover, thank you for the time.
Delighted.
As you all know, Grover is the head of ATR, Americans for Tax Reform. Above that, being the founder and president, he has an MBA from Harvard and has been involved in politics ever since. I think you started out at the Nixon campaign.
I did.
As a very young gentleman, and we will talk.
Sixth grade.
Yeah, well, we will talk a little bit about that, but I would also want to everybody to know about the Taxpayer Protection Pledge that you actually invented and that you kind of have been promoting not only in the US, but we just heard at the Center-Right Coalition meeting that you're just going to Brazil right
Yes.
after our event. And we'll promote it there. So tell us before we get let's start with the Nixon campaign, because I heard rumors that when you were a young man you had kind of long hair.
I did. I had long hair down to my shoulders, and they weren't going to allow me to attend the big Nixon dinner in Boston because we're going to have rules against long hair, and they decided to change those rules.
So was this moralistic or more anti-liberty and anti-freedom, or what was this?
I think they were worried that there would be demonstrators, and they thought the way to divide potential demonstrators from Nixon supporters was hairline, which is not 100% accurate. So they passed on that.
Not with the conservatives back then.
No.
Now we have different issues.
This is true.
Okay, good. So what do you think? Has the right been associated with these adjectives much longer, or have they overcome that? Or how would you describe the ideal conservative these days?
Well, in the United States, the center-right movement, the Republican Party, the Libertarian Party, is a collection of people who simply want to be left alone on their vote-moving issue. So they may want their lower taxes, they may want business deregulated, they may want their Second Amendment rights to own and carry a gun if they wish, to educate their own children at the schools they choose, to practice their faith as they choose. All of the groups have different, around the table there are people with different, I want to go to church all day, I want to make money all day, I want to carry my guns all day, I want to educate my children, I want to homeschool, I want to spend my time in different ways with the government out and away. And it's not that everybody agrees on all issues, they all agree that the government should leave everybody else alone. And that's what unifies the center-right, and why we don't have conflicts, because the guy who cares about economics doesn't mind if other people care about freedom of speech or education or homeschooling or the Second Amendment, or that's fine, doesn't bother me, doesn't get my way. That's why we can work well together.
Well, this is why you also run the Center-Right Coalition meetings, and not only in the US, but you exported them successfully across the continents to Europe. Well, we have been running our Center-Right Coalition meeting for more than 20 years now, and to Latin America and to many other places.
Japan was first.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's well. Sometimes they are other. Also on tax issues, they were really sometimes copy pasting the good stuff first.
Yeah. They pick up on good ideas quickly.
Not till monetary policy, but that's a different thing. So before we come to the famous Taxpayers Protection Pledge, which you will see a bit later, and where Grover will tell us more about. I just wanted to go back to the young Grover. You mentioned once the following: when I became 21, I decided that nobody learned anything about politics after the age of 21. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, that was an observation that people sort of decide where they are politically when they start voting. Why it's very important to get young people's first vote to be for, in the United States, the Republican Party. When Reagan was president, he was very popular. The predecessor, Jimmy Carter, was very unpopular. And so there was a 12-year period where young people coming in saw success in the Republican Party, failure in the Democratic Party, made people much more Republican. And so that's an argument for getting to people young, focusing on colleges, high schools, and having candidates that will talk to younger voters, because once they've decided, people who decide on a particular brand of peanut butter tend to stick with it the rest of their lives. Politics is a lot like that. There's some famous people who used to be left and they go right or the other way around. Those are famous because there's so few of them. They're unusual. most people make a decision and stick with it. You want them to choose early liberty.
So, actually, you founded the ATR, the Americans for Tax Reform, in the Reagan era, which was the golden era of conservatives. Also for us in Europe, when Lady Thatcher was the Iron Lady. So today the right is undergoing many changes. It seems that the electorate has grown disillusioned with free trade, which, according to Trump, shipped blue-collar jobs thousands of miles away out of the country. Do you think this is the end of the Reaganite or fusionist conservatism, or is there a new form of it, or what will emerge?
No, the modern Republican Party, the modern center-right in the United States, and I think in many countries, is the Leave Us Alone coalition, which Reagan put together. Reagan found it, designed it, recognized it was happening, spoke to a coalition committed to liberty. Trump was a successful president because he agreed with Reagan on taxes, he agreed with Reagan on deregulation. He fought for lower spending. The COVID didn't help, but that didn't work out very well on spending levels. But the modern Republican Party is a Reagan Republican Party. Trump is somewhere else on trade, but where he has thrown up tariffs, it hurt the United States. It didn't help jobs, it killed jobs. When you don't allow people to sell you steel, it makes your cars not competitive. So I think we've seen that tariffs are a failed policy throughout history, the last 4,000 years, but also in the United States more recently. So people talk a good game, and there's always been an undercurrent of protectionism because free trade is a difficult concept for some people to understand.
Well, and hopefully we will overcome that, because trade deficits doesn't mean that a country per se doesn't perform. It's just an exchange, a means of exchange. It's just a technical term, and nothing else.
Trade deficit means you're rich and you buy a lot of things.
And it's
good. It's not bad.
Exactly, and it's a technical term, and that's all of it that we economists came up with. So that's all.
Yep.
Good. So let's come back to the populist rhetoric that the new platform of the Republican Party sometimes intervened or started out. Back then in 1966, the good old times when you were a student, a kid even, and you said, after a rousing speech in South Carolina, Nixon said, "This is the future of this party, right here in the South." And do you think that Nixon was right when what he was kind of describing, or is there a no-go to go back to that?
No, what Nixon found out was that he could communicate with southern states. Because of the Civil War, there were 11 states that were with the Confederacy. They were solid Democrat states for 100 years. It just went on and on and on because they hated Lincoln, because they didn't appreciate the Civil War. And they were Democrats, and they voted for liberal Democrats, they voted for left-wing Democrats, but they were on many issues actually conservative. They're very serious about the Second Amendment rights, the right to keep and bear arms. They were committed to their religion, to the religious liberty, and to practicing their own faith, something the left is not very supportive of. They wanted lower taxes. They knew that their ability to the U.S. is a big free trade zone. And so if they have lower taxes, companies did move into the South. And so the South, which used to just be agricultural, became a strong industrial base in the United States because the North started raising taxes and having labor unions mess up the economy. And largely the South was union-free. So when race stopped being the central issue for Democratic voters, which is what kept them in the Democratic Party because they supported it, they just said, okay, there are other issues than race. How about taxes and jobs and the Second Amendment and religious liberty? And that they were all with the Republican Party and shared no values with the Democratic Party. And so the South has moved solidly right, low tax, few unions, less spending, much more liberty. And people move into the South away from the high tax northern states.
Well, after the tax protection pledge, after you have explained that to us, we can probably go a little bit into depth, because you impressed me most last year at a conference where you presented the control of 50 state legislators from 1931 to 2023, and exactly by those policies that you're explaining now. But first, may I please ask you to explain our audience what the Taxpayers Protection Pledge is, and who has signed it, and why you want them to sign it, and who has not signed it.
Sure. The Taxpayer Protection Pledge is a simple pledge. I will oppose and vote against all efforts to raise taxes. So no raising taxes. Doesn't mean you have to vote for every tax cut that comes along, but no tax increases. And this was brought forward in 1986 in order to help pass Reagan's tax reform bill. People feared that if Congress went into the back rooms and started moving all the taxes around, that while Reagan wanted a tax cut or revenue neutral, but wanted to bring rates down, the fear was that even if rates came down, you could broaden the base so that overall taxes were raised. So 100 congressmen, representatives, and 20 senators, and one president, Reagan, signed the pledge. We will not support any tax increase. That meant even the Democrats who were negotiating with us kept the bill. It was a $50 billion tax cut. The eventual
everybody
86
remembers
bill.
that very well.
It was not a tax increase, it was a cut. And then the pledge was so successful in helping Republicans get elected. Almost everybody who signed it was a Republican, a couple of Democrats. But in 1994, 5 Democrats who had signed the pledge and gotten elected all switched parties and became Republicans. So since 1994, almost all the Republicans signed the pledge, and no successful Democrat has ever taken the pledge since '94. The two parties are completely at odds. Republicans will not raise your taxes and will cut them. Democrats will raise your taxes every chance they get. And that has given the Republican Party the ability to be competitive. Before '94, before everybody had taken the pledge, and that was publicly understood, Republicans won control of Congress twice. 2 years under Eisenhower, 2 years under Truman. But in a 62-year period, twice they won Congress. Since '94, Republicans have won Congress half the time, 50% of the time. So we've become a competitive party because we are the party that will not raise your taxes.
Well, that's great news. We should actually export this to Europe. Would you be willing to present this?
Absolutely.
Well,
40 members of the Tory party in England have taken the pledge.
Well,
That's a start.
unfortunately, England is not member of the European
That's true.
Union anymore. But we will have to come back. So maybe at the next year's roadshow, touring Europe,
Love to.
we will present that. Well, thank you for that. And you already mentioned this control of the legislators. Could you also a little bit elaborate a bit more on that so that our audience understands how deep you trigger with
Sure.
your research?
The 50 states, in the United States, we have a federal system. A lot of decisions are made at the state level. So states can compete with lower taxes, less regulation, less power for labor unions, more openings for opportunity for people. And as more and more states have decided we're never raising taxes, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, they have no personal income tax. They have the sales tax, but not a personal income tax, and they're not raising taxes net. So it's been very, very helpful, and the competition has forced blue states to be less crazy, less destructive, not to raise taxes as much as they'd like to. But that competition is an advantage for the center-right because our ideas work at the state level. We can take an idea like cutting taxes state by state and then go to Washington and do the same thing. We now have 14 plus 7, 21 states that have a single rate tax, a flat rate tax. 7 of them it's 0, 14 it's a number that's not 0. But 21 states, almost half, have a single rate tax. We expect that in the next 5 years, another 5 states will be at a single rate tax. And then we'll go to Washington and say, at the state level, we've seen real success with a one tax, not a graduated or progressive income tax. And perhaps we should do that nationally. And then elected officials, senators, congressmen, presidents would go, well, half the country already lives with a single rate tax at the state level. So they understand it. So when I take it to Washington, it's easier to make the case. Democrats can't experiment in one state because their ideas fail. They did single payer health care, like Canada or sort of like Britain, in one state, Vermont. They had to repeal it because it didn't work. So they can't go state to state with their ideas because they failed.
Yeah.
We can.
Well, that's great accomplishment. Congratulations on that. We definitely need to have you in Europe again. So one thing, you once said that you like to work on multiple projects. So maybe you can split your time between Europe and the US.
Absolutely.
That's very great. But what excites you most about the future, and what things would you like to work on, and would you like to develop?
Well, in the States, but also in other countries, getting to a single rate tax where you tax everybody the same rate, which means when the politicians want to raise taxes, they have to talk to everybody at once, not, you guys don't listen, I'm just going to tax these people over here, then I'll come back for you later. So a single rate tax, very important. The other is school choice, where whatever money the government, the state, local government, federal government is going to spend on education goes directly to students, not to some building full of unionized teachers, but to the backpack of a student, and whatever school that child and their parent wants to go to, that's where the money goes to. And that will give you competition, which always improves quality and drives down costs. And since the biggest government monopoly in the United States is not the Army, it's education spending, that does a lot of damage because it's run by a monopoly. Monopolies don't do things well. Governments don't do things well because they're monopolies, among other reasons. And they're spending other people's money. But parents spending their own money, deciding on what schools to go to, will increase the number of students who are able to learn and succeed, reduce the number of government employees, and reduce the number of the power of the monopoly, which is a political power as well as a social power, and it's destructive both in its education, its social, and its political efforts. So those are the really big issues. Single rate tax, and then at the state level down to zero, and school choice.
Well, I think we have still a lot of work to do. Thank you, Grover, that you take up this big burden and that you are so successful in doing so. We are looking forward to having Grover back in Europe, and you will see him at our free market roadshows, but also at other events. So stay tuned and definitely look what is going on here in DC with the Center-Right Coalition meetings.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.